Former Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize's name has surfaced in yet another special investigating unit inquiry, this time in connection with a tender that grew from 3.5 million rand to 114 million rand. Mkhize was KwaZulu-Natal's Finance and Economic Development MEC at the time. According to a News 24 report, a contract issued to Universal Security Services by the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government in 2007 was irregular. And just a note, we have reached out to the SIU for further clarification on that report, but it declined the interview as the matter is already before the courts. We're joined now to discuss how this may affect Mkhize's campaign leading up to the ANC conference and the step-aside rule as with political analyst, Professor Sipho Seepe. Prof, thank you very much for availing yourself this morning. As we mentioned, we reached out to the SIU, but they declined the interview. And according to another report in The Citizen, it reads, and I quote, an affidavit by a SIU investigator stated that KZN Treasury's former head, Sipho Seepe, wrote a letter to Mkhize motivating for Operation Unembeza to be rolled out to all provincial government departments. It further states, it is not clear if Mkhize replied to Shabalala's letter. I scratched through the SIU's website just to see and try and test these allegations ourselves and to see this report, but that effort drew to a nil. Is it clear to you, at least, whether this can be verified or if you have any knowledge of it?
The people who can provide clarity on this is the SIU. But when you read the language of the report and what is purported to be coming from the SIU, it is not yet a declaration of corruption. It is the irregular awarding of a contract that moved from a small amount and ballooned to a big amount. And what is at stake here is whether when that contract was awarded, whether the former Minister of Health was actually directly involved. But what has emerged is that the ballooning came as a result of a proposal that instead of this group looking at or providing forensic risk services to Treasury, it should also extend to the provincial departments. So the SIU wants the contract to be declared irregular so that that matter is dealt with. And then after it has been declared irregular, then there'll be other processes that can be taken. And then for Mr. Mkhize, former Minister Mkhize, what is important is whether this irregularity amounts to corruption, because you can have instances where the awarding is irregular, but there was never an intention to corrupt. It could have been that either an oversight or overzealousness to provide a service that he considered to be important. This is why these matters ultimately must go to court. But as a first instance, what emerges from the SIU is the declaration of this contract being irregular. This is no different from the findings of the public chapter on Pravin, where a contract in SARS was awarded irregularly. Whether there was corruption in that, it's something else. But when there's irregularity, what it means that there is maladministration. But the issue for members of the ANC will be really guided by their own policy, because what they have raised is the people who are alleged to have been involved in corrupt activities or to have been accused of corruption. Those are the people who should step aside. We are not yet there where the SIU has blatantly and categorically said, here there was corruption. What they've said is that the first stage is the irregularity of the awarding of the contract.
Fair enough. Let's talk about this figure that very confidently and comfortably led the country through some of the most difficult times when we look at the start of the COVID pandemic in the country, and maybe go back to 2012 when he ascended to the national road of Party Treasurer General in December of that year to the Zweli Mkhize of 2022. How would you characterize him?
Well, I mean, he had played a major role in terms of making sure that funders continue to fund the ANC. there has not been any indication that suggests that he failed in that regard. Remember, what we are faced with now is the ANC that cannot even pay its own workers. During Mkhize's time, this was never an issue. The same applies to during the time when you had Matthew Posa. As the record state, Matthew Posa has been out there to say, as a matter of fact, in his time, there were also what you call salary increases almost every year. So you're talking about the at least on the surface, a proper management of, or put this way, an ability by the ANC to source funding. And at the moment, we know that that is not the case. And as a Minister of Health, there was a time when his posture and his take of the portfolio was considered to be presidential. He led the dealing of COVID-19 from the front and providing as much clarity about this pandemic. But of course, he could do that as a medical doctor. And he won a lot of praise for that until we had the digital vibes, which almost put a stop to what appeared to be somebody who was ascending and who could be seen as a contender and a comfortable contender for the position of the president of the ANC.
Where do you see his place as we head to the ANC's policy conference in July and eventually the conference in December? As you note, we are not yet there when it comes to the SIU right out saying that he is responsible for corruption.
Well, what he had said in stepping aside or stepping down from the position of the minister, he was saying, I need to deal with these issues. And he has already taken some of the reports for legal review, the first one on digital vibes. And the members of parliament who a committee that looked into this actually had found that he is not guilty of the ethics and members' interest code of ethics. But of course, one cannot rely on comrades when their comrades are looking at you. But politically, it is significant for him that he has been cleared, so he can go confidently to say, as far as members of parliament are concerned, they had found nothing wrong with me, or they've actually given me a bill of health in terms of that matter. Then the second issue would be what the courts decide in his legal review. Because what he's actually trying to do is to say, let me clear my name so that when I contest, then these skeletons are not there for people to always bring them up. I mean, here we have a matter that occurred 15 years ago that has been brought. So anybody who raises their hand, they must also understand that there be a thorough investigation we should have corruption being dealt with. But the dealing with corruption must not be, the motive should not be driven by the fact of having to remove people from contending. We should not be using state apparatus and state organs and institutions to advance political interest. And this is something that Mkhize is beginning to point out, that all these things will come. There'll be attempts to besmirch my name, but it is all about preventing me from contesting for leadership of the ANC. And we should also be vigilant. The ANC must sort its issues politically, but it must not use state institutions. But as matters stand, the resolution of the NEC on the step aside still stands, and it guides members of the ANC. And Mkhize seems to be determined to make sure that it doesn't fall foul of that resolution.
Analyst Professor Sipho Seepe, thank you very much for availing yourself this morning.